I want you to imagine for a moment, stepping beyond the ordinary limits of your perception. I want you to feel what it is to truly stand at the edge of your own mind, and then deliberately to peer over into the territory of another consciousness. It is not enough, I have realized, to merely feel for someone else. To truly know another being is not an exercise in sympathy, but a radical, almost dangerous act of venturing into the unfamiliar landscapes of someone else's reality. When I first began to explore this, I understood that empathy, the kind often spoken of in polite conversation, is trivial in comparison to the kind I am proposing. This is not a gentle hand on a shoulder. This is a psychotropic, mind-altering act that requires you to dissolve the familiar boundaries of your identity. I speak as one who has looked into the kaleidoscopic chaos of the human mind and seen how utterly unique, yet miraculously interconnected, each consciousness truly is. I remember the first time it struck me. I was observing someone, a complete stranger, not in the superficial way we often do, through fleeting glances or casual judgments, but by truly watching the minute details of their interaction with the world. I noticed the subtle tremor in their hands as they held a cup of coffee, the hesitation in the cadence of their voice, the way their eyes flickered when they processed a thought too large to express. And in that moment, I felt an inexplicable pull. I realized that empathy was not simply understanding a feeling, it was stepping into a reality wholly other than my own, walking across the fragile bridge of shared human experience and seeing the world through the lens of another's subjective truth. When I first began experimenting with this, I approached it cautiously. There is a kind of fear involved, a fear that is both thrilling and necessary. You are, in a sense, giving yourself away. You are saying to the universe, I am willing to inhabit your world even for a fleeting moment without judgment, without pretense. And in that vulnerability lies the magic. It is a magic that is radical in its simplicity, yet so profound that it can transform the very structure of your consciousness. I am speaking of a shift so fundamental that once experienced, you cannot unexperience it. Once you have seen another mind from within, your own mind is never the same again. I often reflect on the peculiar paradox that exists at the heart of empathy. We live in a world where every individual's reality is utterly singular, sculpted by a lifetime of memories, sensations, and private narratives. And yet, there exists this invisible thread that binds us all together, a thread that can be accessed through deep, conscious empathy. I recall times when I have witnessed someone's grief, not from the safe distance of compassion, but by immersing myself fully in it. In those moments, I did not simply see their sorrow. I felt the intricate geometry of their inner landscape, understood the patterns and textures of their despair, and in doing so, discovered hidden corridors within my own mind that I had never visited before. It is almost psychedelic the way this process unfolds. There is a temporary dissolution of self, a loosening of the egoic structures we cling to so desperately. In this dissolution, the boundaries between I and you begin to blur, and what remains is a shared experience of consciousness itself. I have called this the alchemy of empathy. It is as though we are all, in some hidden way, connected by invisible membranes of perception, and by consciously stepping through these membranes, we engage in a kind of mental transmutation that alters the very fabric of our reality. I have seen it in the eyes of those who dare to look, and I have felt it in the quiet chambers of my own mind. I cannot stress enough the power inherent in this practice. It is not passive. It is not simply a matter of imagining what another person feels. No, it is an active, almost surgical engagement with the other's subjective world. When I enter someone else's consciousness in this way, I feel the weight of their joys and sorrows pressing against the walls of my own awareness. I feel their pasts and futures, the invisible timelines that have led them to this exact moment. and in doing so, I am transformed. This is not empathy as a social nicety. This is empathy as an existential exploration. There are moments when this work feels frighteningly intimate. I have sat across from friends, strangers, even casual acquaintances, and allowed myself to inhabit the textures of their minds. In those moments I am confronted with the sheer alienness of human consciousness, and yet, within that alienness, I find astonishing resonance. The laughter of one person echoes in the hidden chambers of my own memory. The ache of another's heartbreak awakens a forgotten tenderness. I come to understand that our realities, while distinct, are also interwoven by these shared currents of experience. It is here, in this delicate balance of uniqueness and universality, that true understanding emerges. I have begun to see empathy as a practice, a discipline that can be cultivated deliberately. It requires courage, attentiveness, and a willingness to suspend the assumptions that so often imprison us. I encourage myself in quiet moments to observe without judgment, to feel without interference, and to step fully into the other's world without losing awareness of my own. It is a dance, a careful navigation of the liminal spaces between self and other, where each movement must be precise, each gesture intentional. And yet, there is a joy in this work that is impossible to overstate. It is a joy born of connection, a thrill derived from glimpsing the ineffable landscapes of another mind and recognizing, in the mirrored contours, something profoundly human, something that also belongs to me. I have noticed, too, that the ordinary structures of society often discourage this radical empathy. We are trained to categorize, to stereotype, to reduce the other to something comprehensible and therefore safe. But when we resist these reductions, when we allow ourselves to encounter the fullness of another being, we open the door to transformation. I have felt this personally, in moments of deep engagement, where the boundaries between myself and the other dissolved entirely, leaving only a profound sense of shared presence. It is unsettling, yes, but it is also exhilarating. I find myself returning repeatedly to the idea of consciousness as a field, not a series of isolated islands. Each of us carries a unique pattern, a personal constellation of thoughts, memories, and sensations. But these patterns do not exist in isolation. They ripple outward, intersecting with other patterns, creating intricate networks of resonance and dissonance. In my own explorations, I have experienced these intersections as both chaotic and sublime, frightening and beautiful in equal measure. It is here, in these intersections, that empathy operates, not as a passive reflection, but as an active engagement with the living, breathing complexity of human experience. Sometimes I close my eyes and allow myself to drift into the consciousness of others. I imagine the minute details of their perception, the way light bends across their eyes, the rhythm of their thoughts, the particular timbre of their joys and sorrows. I do this not to escape myself, but to deepen my understanding of myself through the lens of another. I have come to believe that by inhabiting these parallel realities, even briefly, we expand the very boundaries of what it means to be human. And I am learning, slowly, that there is a discipline to this expansion. It is not a casual dalliance. There is a rigor, a careful attention to nuance, a recognition that one misstep can collapse the fragile bridge that empathy constructs. But when it succeeds, when it is executed with clarity and respect, the result is breathtaking. I feel in these moments a kinship with the vast tapestry of human consciousness, a recognition that despite our differences, we are all threads woven into the same intricate fabric, each thread necessary, each one contributing to the whole. It is not an easy path, this journey into radical empathy. I have encountered resistance, both internally and externally. My own mind rebels at times, retreating into familiar self-centered patterns. Others, unaccustomed to such deep engagement, resist as well, erecting walls of skepticism, doubt, and fear. Yet, I persist. I'm drawn forward by the knowledge that something extraordinary lies on the other side of these walls. A connection that transcends the ordinary, a resonance that reaches into the very core of what it means to be alive. I have begun to recognize, in subtle ways, the broader implications of this practice. If enough of us cultivate this radical conscious empathy, what might happen to the collective human experience? I see glimpses of a world where the isolating walls of misunderstanding crumble, where dialogue replaces conflict, where curiosity supplants judgment. It is a world that is not utopian in the naive sense, but profound in its depth, a world where each of us participates in the co-creation of shared understanding, and in doing so, expands the boundaries of human consciousness itself. Even now, as I speak, I feel the pull of these other realities, the magnetic call of minds both near and far, inviting me to bridge the gap, to dissolve the illusion of separation, to inhabit the unknown. It is intoxicating, it is terrifying, it is ultimately liberating. I am convinced that empathy, when embraced as I have described it, is one of the most radical and transformative acts a human being can undertake. It is a journey into the mind, into the heart, into the very essence of what it means to be alive. I move forward now deeper into the labyrinth of consciousness, tracing the currents of connection that ripple through the human mind. I feel the contours of other realities pressing against the walls of my awareness, and I realize that these moments of radical empathy are not fleeting. They are seeds planted in the fertile soil of perception. Each act of inhabiting another's consciousness, each deliberate merging of perspectives, expands the dimensionality of my own awareness. I sense that the universe itself is conspiring, weaving these encounters into a tapestry that reveals the hidden architecture of human experience. In the act of observing, I become more than a witness. I become an instrument, resonating with the harmonics of countless unseen minds, and in this resonance, I discover a profound alchemy that transforms the self into a conduit of collective understanding. I see the patterns now, intricate and overlapping like filaments of light stretching across the invisible networks that bind all beings. Every thought, every emotion, every subtle gesture carries a signature, a vibration that interacts with the vibrations of others. I have felt these interactions ripple through me, creating currents of energy that are at once delicate and overwhelming. I recognize that empathy is the medium through which these currents flow, a force that dissolves isolation and awakens recognition. There is a rhythm to it, a cadence that is not linear but cyclical, spiraling outward and inward simultaneously. It is the pulse of consciousness itself, felt in the synchronization of minds, in the convergence of experiences that transcend time, space, and the boundaries of the individual self. The more I inhabit the consciousness of others, the more I perceive the interdependence that underlies our shared existence. I witness the emergence of subtle correspondences, invisible echoes of joy, grief, and wonder that ripple across cultures, across continents, across epochs. I am astonished at the precision of these resonances, at the way the human experience seems to encode itself into archetypal forms that speak to every mind, every heart. I feel the magnitude of this knowledge pressing into me, an awareness that each act of genuine empathy is a portal, a gateway into a broader, more profound reality. In this awareness, I realize that our so-called separateness is an illusion, a convenient narrative that obscures the depth of our interconnectedness, I find myself drawn to the ways in which these empathic connections shape the evolution of consciousness itself. Each encounter, each merging of perspectives, is a node in a vast network, an invisible lattice upon which understanding grows. I have seen moments where a single act of true empathy catalyzes transformation, igniting insights that ripple outward in ways that are both subtle and monumental. I understand now that this is the mechanism through which culture, civilization, and even the very trajectory of human thought evolve. Radical empathy is not simply a moral imperative, it is a force of cognitive evolution, a tool for navigating the complexities of existence with heightened awareness and profound insight. I reflect on the psychological architecture that allows these connections to flourish. The ego, which so often isolates and protects, must soften, yielding to a more fluid, permeable state of being. I have felt this permeability in moments of intense engagement, where my identity is not lost but expanded, where the boundaries of self are not dissolved entirely but rendered flexible enough to embrace another consciousness. In this space, the mind becomes a vessel, capable of holding the multiplicity of human experience, capable of witnessing without judgment, capable of resonating with the depth and nuance of life as it unfolds in others. I have experienced the exhilaration of this capacity, a vertiginous sense of expansion that is both intoxicating and grounding, a paradox of liberation that leaves me simultaneously diminished and magnified. Through these experiences I have come to understand that the shared human canvas is vast, infinite, and endlessly mutable. Every moment of interaction, every encounter with another being, contributes a brushstroke to this canvas, layering textures of perception, colorations of emotion, and patterns of thought that converge to form a composite picture of what it means to exist. I have traced these layers in my own mind, allowing myself to be shaped and reshaped by the echoes of other lives, by the subtle resonances that emerge when consciousnesses intersect. In doing so, I am not only learning about others, I am learning about myself in dimensions that were previously inaccessible, discovering latent potentials and previously unrecognized capacities for connection, insight, and understanding. I see now that this work is neither linear nor predictable. The paths through consciousness are labyrinthine, winding through shadows of fear, peaks of exhilaration, valleys of sorrow, and stretches of mundane clarity. Each act of empathy is an expedition into these territories, a navigation through unseen landscapes that are at once alien and familiar. I have witnessed the extraordinary variety of human experience, from the depths of despair to the heights of ecstasy, and I have felt the unifying threads that connect these extremes. I am humbled by the scope of this understanding, awed by the intricacy of the systems through which consciousness manifests, and driven by the unrelenting desire to explore further, to continue the journey into the spaces where self and other converge. I have come to recognize that empathy is also an exercise in patience and presence. The act of fully inhabiting another's reality cannot be rushed or performed superficially. It requires sustained attention, a willingness to linger in the textures of experience, to witness without interference, to absorb without distortion. I have sat for hours, observing, listening, feeling, allowing the contours of another mind to unfold before me like a map, whose symbols are unfamiliar but whose meaning resonates deeply. In these moments, I become attuned to subtleties that escape ordinary perception, the cadence of thought, the micro-expressions of emotion, the invisible architecture of memory and desire, and in this attunement, I discover the profound truth that consciousness is not a solitary phenomenon, but a shared dynamic and ever-evolving interplay of forces that demand engagement, reverence, and care. I feel the weight of responsibility in these encounters. Empathy is not a tool to be wielded lightly. It is an ethical, philosophical, and existential commitment. Each act of inhabiting another consciousness carries with it the potential to illuminate or distort, to heal or harm depending on the intention, the awareness, and the presence brought to the interaction. I have become meticulous in my approach, cultivating mindfulness, refining attention, and nurturing the capacity to hold complexity without judgment. In doing so, I have discovered that empathy is simultaneously a practice of liberation and a discipline of discernment, a delicate balance that requires both courage and humility, both surrender and precision. I observe how this radical empathy reverberates outward into collective structures. Societies, communities, and networks of human interaction are transformed when individuals embrace this capacity, when the act of inhabiting another's mind becomes a habitual, deliberate practice. I see the potential for a new paradigm of understanding, where differences are navigated with insight rather than conflict, where collaboration emerges from recognition rather than imposition, and where the multiplicity of human experience is celebrated rather than suppressed. I have glimpsed the future in these interactions, a future in which consciousness is not fragmented but interwoven, not isolated but interdependent, a future in which the cultivation of empathy becomes the foundation for innovation, creativity, and the evolution of human thought. I have come to understand that there is a symphony in these engagements, a resonance that exists beyond language, beyond gesture, beyond conventional communication. It is a language of awareness, of subtle perception, of attunement to the hidden harmonics that govern the interplay of minds. I have felt it in moments of profound connection, when the ordinary barriers of culture, background, and ideology dissolve, leaving only the pure interplay of consciousness. In this space, understanding is immediate, recognition is unmediated, and the mind operates at a frequency that transcends the limitations of conventional cognition. I have pursued this frequency relentlessly, feeling it pulse through my own mind and through the minds of those with whom I connect, and I have witnessed the transformative power that arises when awareness is shared at this depth. I am compelled by the notion that empathy is a gateway to something larger, a portal into the hidden dimensions of reality. I have felt the expansion that occurs when the boundaries of self are permeable, when consciousness flows freely across the thresholds that separate us. In inhabiting the inner worlds of others, I encounter fragments of the universal, glimpses of patterns that transcend individual lives, and I am struck by the beauty, the intricacy, and the coherence of these interconnected systems. I recognize that each interaction is a microcosm, a reflection of the broader architecture of existence, and that by cultivating this radical empathy, we participate in an ongoing evolution of perception that shapes not only ourselves but the collective trajectory of human awareness. I have committed myself to exploring this frontier without reservation. Each encounter, each deliberate act of inhabiting another mind deepens my understanding, expands my capacity for insight, and strengthens the invisible bonds that unite us all. I perceive the universe as a vast web of consciousness, with nodes and pathways that extend beyond what can be articulated, and I navigate this web with intention, curiosity, and reverence. I am aware that the journey is infinite, that each step reveals new complexities and new possibilities, and that the practice of empathy is both the map and the terrain, the method and the destination, the key and the door. I sense that the transformation wrought by this radical engagement is subtle yet profound. It alters perception, reshapes priorities, and recalibrates understanding in ways that ripple outward into every facet of experience. I notice changes in the way I listen, in the way I respond, in the way I inhabit my own consciousness. I am more attuned, more patient, more willing to encounter the unfamiliar without fear. And as I extend this practice outward, into every interaction, into every human encounter, I perceive the gradual expansion of a collective consciousness that is capable of deeper insight, broader awareness, and richer connection. I have come to realize that this journey is endless, that each mind is an entire universe unto itself, and that the act of inhabiting another consciousness is a continuous, dynamic, and profoundly transformative exploration. I am propelled forward by curiosity, guided by intuition, and anchored by the knowledge that in each act of empathy, I am participating in a process that transcends the individual, shaping the contours of shared human experience, expanding the boundaries of understanding, and illuminating the hidden architecture of consciousness in ways that are both exhilarating and essential. I feel the currents of consciousness stretching outward, connecting threads of perception that I had only glimpsed before. Each moment of radical empathy becomes a lens through which I perceive hidden structures of reality, the invisible scaffolding upon which experience is built. I have come to realize that the act of entering another's mind is not just an interaction, it is a form of excavation, unearthing layers of awareness that exist beyond the ordinary limits of perception. I sense the subtleties of thought and emotion interlacing, weaving into patterns that are both alien and intimately familiar. In inhabiting these patterns, I discover a universe that mirrors my own, yet exceeds it. A landscape where understanding is not intellectual but visceral, not observed but lived. I move deeper, feeling the interplay of awareness as it pulses between minds. There is a vibrancy to this connection, a luminous intensity that defies description. I have experienced moments where the boundaries of self dissolve entirely, where the distinctions between my consciousness and that of another become imperceptible. In these moments, I am not simply aware of another being. I am part of their awareness, and they are part of mine. I feel the convergence of histories, emotions, and perspectives flowing into one another, creating a composite resonance that illuminates hidden corridors of meaning. Each act of empathy becomes a portal, a passage through which I traverse not only the interior landscapes of others, but the uncharted territories of my own mind. The experience is both exhilarating and disorienting. I sense the fragility of identity, the delicate architecture of the ego, and the ways in which it constrains perception. Yet when I allow myself to inhabit another consciousness fully, I am liberated from these constraints. I feel the expansion of possibility, the infinite elasticity of thought and feeling, and the capacity to perceive reality in ways that transcend the habitual and mundane. It is a radical liberation, one that illuminates the potential for transformation inherent in every encounter, every interaction, every fleeting connection. I have come to understand that empathy is a practice of active engagement. It is not a passive reflection or a fleeting sympathy. It is a conscious, deliberate act of stepping into another's subjective world and witnessing it with precision, clarity, and reverence. I have felt the alchemy of this engagement, the way it reshapes perception, opens hidden channels of understanding, and cultivates a resonance that reverberates beyond the individual self. I perceive the threads of consciousness intertwining, forming a complex lattice of shared experience that transcends time, space, and the limitations of ordinary thought. It is in this lattice that I find the architecture of connection, the blueprint for a consciousness that is simultaneously personal and collective, intimate and universal. I recognize the profound responsibility inherent in this exploration. Each act of inhabiting another mind carries consequences, subtle yet significant. I have witnessed the power of empathy to heal, to illuminate, to transform. But I have also observed the fragility of these exchanges, the ease with which misunderstanding or interference can fracture the delicate threads of awareness. I approach each engagement with intention, cultivating presence, attentiveness, and respect for the integrity of the other's consciousness. In doing so, I discover that empathy is not only a practice of connection but a discipline of ethics, an awareness that every act of perception carries weight, consequence, and potential. The more I practice this radical empathy, the more I perceive its implications for human evolution. I see the way that collective understanding emerges from the convergence of individual consciousnesses, how insights ripple outward from one mind to another, creating networks of meaning that shape culture, society, and the trajectory of thought itself. I am drawn to the vision of a humanity capable of inhabiting these networks consciously, deliberately, and with awareness. I imagine a world in which the act of perceiving another's mind becomes a habitual practice, a means of cultivating insight, creativity, and harmony. I see the transformative potential of this practice, the ways in which it can dissolve isolation, foster collaboration, and elevate consciousness beyond the limitations of individual ego. I feel the subtle harmonics of thought and emotion that flow through these networks. I have sensed the echo of a joy in one mind resonating through another, the reflection of sorrow moving across consciousness like a wave, the silent transmission of wonder, awe, and curiosity that transcends language and gesture. I understand that these currents are not incidental, they are the foundation of connection, the mechanism through which empathy operates at its most profound level. I have felt the electric pulse of recognition, the moment when the alien becomes familiar, the other becomes known, and in that instant, I perceive the universality of human experience. I have observed that radical empathy expands not only perception but also the capacity for creativity. In inhabiting another's mind, I access perspectives, ideas, and insights that would remain inaccessible within the confines of my own consciousness. I feel the expansion of possibility, the generation of novel thought patterns, the synthesis of experiences that were previously discrete. It is a cognitive alchemy, a transformation in which the raw material of diverse consciousnesses is transmuted into insight, innovation, and understanding. I perceive the potential for this process to shape the evolution of thought, to catalyze creativity at scales that are both personal and collective, and to generate solutions to challenges that transcend individual capability. The intensity of this work is relentless. I have found that the practice of inhabiting consciousness requires vigilance, discipline, and courage. I am acutely aware of the ways in which habitual patterns, biases, and preconceptions can distort perception, and I actively dismantle these constraints in order to approach the other's mind with clarity and openness. I feel the expansion of awareness that accompanies this discipline, the sharpening of perception, the deepening of insight. I recognize that empathy at this level is not merely emotional, it is cognitive, perceptual, and existential. It reshapes the architecture of thought, illuminates the hidden landscapes of consciousness, and fosters an attunement to the subtleties of life that is impossible to achieve through ordinary awareness. I perceive the transformative impact of this work on relationships. I have seen the way that deep, sustained engagement with another consciousness creates bonds that are simultaneously intimate and expansive. I feel the resonance of shared experience, the amplification of understanding, and the subtle harmonics that emerge when two or more minds converge. I recognize that these bonds are not contingent upon similarity, familiarity, or convenience. They are forged in the crucible of shared awareness, in the deliberate act of inhabiting and appreciating the reality of another being. It is a connection that transcends superficiality, that endures beyond circumstance, and that catalyzes growth, insight, and transformation in ways that are profound and lasting. I sense the expansion of collective intelligence as a natural consequence of radical empathy. I have felt the way in which understanding, when cultivated consciously, spreads through networks of consciousness, enhancing problem-solving, insight, and creativity. I perceive the subtle shifts in perspective that occur when individuals engage deeply with one another, the ways in which the boundaries of self are extended, redefined, and integrated into a broader system of awareness. I recognize that this process is both organic and deliberate, a dynamic interplay of perception, resonance, and synthesis that shapes not only individual minds, but the trajectory of human consciousness as a whole. I feel the urgency of this work. In a world increasingly fragmented by isolation, polarization, and misunderstanding, the cultivation of radical empathy is not merely desirable, it is essential. I have witnessed the corrosive effects of disconnection, the subtle erosion of understanding, and the pervasive limitations imposed by self-centered perception. Yet, I have also felt the potential for restoration, transformation, and expansion. By deliberately inhabiting other consciousnesses, by cultivating attentiveness, openness, and resonance, I perceive the emergence of a more interconnected, insightful, and capable humanity. I understand that this is not an abstract ideal. It is a tangible, actionable path, accessible to those willing to engage fully, consciously, and without reservation. I have experienced the exhilaration of this process in moments of pure engagement. I feel the electric surge of connection, the luminous clarity of shared perception, the profound intimacy of inhabiting a mind without losing my own. I recognize that these moments, while rare, are replicable, and that the principles underlying them can be cultivated, practiced, and expanded. I sense the continuous unfolding of consciousness, the ongoing evolution of understanding, and the inexhaustible potential for insight and transformation. Each act of empathy is a step into this unfolding, a deliberate movement into the infinite landscape of human experience, a conscious traversal of the hidden corridors that connect us all. I am propelled by the knowledge that radical empathy is both a path and a practice, a methodology for navigating the complexities of consciousness, and a philosophy that reshapes the boundaries of self, other, and shared experience. I feel the intertwining of minds as a living architecture, a system of dynamic resonance that illuminates both individual and collective potential. I perceive the hidden currents of human experience as a vast, interconnected web, a network of awareness that is accessible through disciplined engagement, deliberate attunement, and fearless exploration. In inhabiting this network, I discover the profundity of our shared reality, the elegance of its design, and the boundless potential for insight, creativity, and connection. I feel the infinite possibilities that arise when consciousness is engaged in this way. Each interaction, each deliberate act of inhabiting another's mind, generates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate encounter, touching other minds, other lives, and other moments yet to unfold. I perceive the exponential impact of radical empathy, the way in which understanding, insight, and resonance propagate through networks of human awareness, reshaping the landscape of thought, perception, and experience. I understand that this is not speculation. It is a direct observation, a lived reality, a principle that can be cultivated and expanded consciously. I have committed myself fully to this practice. I feel its transformative power in every fiber of my being, in the architecture of my thought, in the contours of my perception, and in the depth of my understanding. I am immersed in the currents of consciousness, tracing patterns, resonating with frequencies, and inhabiting the worlds of others while remaining anchored in my own. I sense the infinite potential of this engagement, the boundless scope of human experience, and the inexhaustible capacity for insight, creativity, and connection that emerges when empathy is embraced as a radical, deliberate, and transformative practice. I have lingered in these currents of consciousness long enough to perceive patterns that are otherwise invisible, and now I see the full magnitude of what it means to inhabit another mind. The act of empathy is no longer a fleeting engagement. It is the very architecture of connection, the foundation upon which understanding, creativity, and human evolution are built. I feel the cumulative weight of every encounter, every deliberate merging of perspectives, and I recognize that each instance contributes to a greater, unseen tapestry, a web of consciousness that stretches beyond my own comprehension yet is intimately present in every thought, sensation, and experience. In inhabiting these worlds, I have discovered that the boundaries of self are not limitations, but invitations, portals through which the vastness of human experience may flow, integrating, expanding, and ultimately transforming the very essence of perception. I have begun to perceive that the process of radical empathy is simultaneously subtle and seismic. It unfolds in minute gestures, in the nuanced patterns of expression, in the silent interplay of thought and emotion. And yet, when fully realized, it has the power to alter the landscape of entire societies, to recalibrate relationships, to reshape the trajectory of collective consciousness. I have observed the impact of these engagements, the way understanding reverberates outward, catalyzing insights that echo beyond the immediate moment, touching lives, altering perspectives, and inspiring transformations that ripple through networks of awareness in ways both profound and enduring. There is a sacredness to this work, a recognition that to inhabit another mind is to step into a domain that is both intimate and infinitely complex. I have felt the gravity of this responsibility, the need for precision, reverence, and intentionality. Every act of empathy carries consequences, subtle yet profound, shaping perception, guiding insight, and constructing connections that endure. I have cultivated a discipline around this practice, refining my awareness, honing my capacity to hold complexity without judgment, and developing the resilience to navigate the dissonance, confusion, and contradictions that arise when consciousness intersects with consciousness. In doing so, I have discovered that empathy is not merely a tool for understanding. It is a transformative practice, a vehicle for the evolution of the self, and a gateway to deeper, more expansive dimensions of human experience. I have encountered, repeatedly, the paradoxical nature of this expansion. The deeper I inhabit another's mind, the more I perceive the universality of human experience, yet I also confront the infinite diversity that defines it. I witness joy, grief, fear, wonder, and longing in forms both familiar and utterly alien, and recognize that these variations are not barriers, but conduits, channels through which consciousness can expand, resonate, and interconnect. I have learned to move fluidly across these channels, embracing the contradictions, the tensions, and the harmonies that emerge, and in doing so, I have cultivated a depth of understanding that is both rare and transformative. I feel the acceleration of insight that occurs when consciousness is engaged in this radical, deliberate manner. Each act of inhabiting another mind generates not only understanding but also perspective, synthesis, and revelation. I have traced the ways in which these experiences converge to form a multidimensional network of awareness, a living architecture that extends beyond the confines of any single consciousness. I see the unfolding of human understanding as a process not linear but fractal, infinitely recursive, and expanding outward with every intentional act of engagement. Each moment of empathy adds to this expansion, a wave that travels through the collective psyche, amplifying awareness, dissolving separation, and opening new dimensions of possibility. I recognize too the transformative potential of this practice for the evolution of culture, society, and civilization. The deliberate cultivation of radical empathy fosters environments in which collaboration, insight, and creative problem-solving flourish. I have witnessed how understanding at this depth diminishes conflict, transcends superficial differences, and cultivates genuine shared comprehension. It is a practice that extends beyond individual development, shaping networks of interaction, informing decision-making, and reconfiguring social dynamics in ways that are profound, enduring, and ultimately life-affirming. In inhabiting the consciousness of others, I see the blueprint for a more coherent, compassionate, and innovative collective reality. I have felt the full spectrum of human emotion reverberating through this interconnected network. The intensity of joy, the weight of sorrow, the subtle harmonics of longing, and the radiance of awe all flow through these channels, shaping my own perception, refining my understanding, and expanding the capacity for insight. I recognize that the richness of human experience is not diminished by diversity, it is amplified, multiplied, and interwoven into a fabric of understanding that transcends the limitations of individual identity. I have observed, with both awe and humility, the ways in which consciousness can be shared, extended, and amplified, generating insights, revelations, and transformations that reach far beyond the immediate moment. I feel the power of connection in ways that are both exhilarating and humbling. Each deliberate engagement with another consciousness deepens my awareness of the interconnectedness of life, the fragility and resilience of perception, and the infinite potential contained within the human mind. I have observed how empathy, when fully realized, catalyzes transformation, reshapes understanding, and illuminates previously inaccessible dimensions of experience. It is a force that transcends the superficial, penetrates the structural, and resonates at the core of existence, revealing truths that are simultaneously intimate and universal, personal and collective. I have discovered that radical empathy is not limited to extraordinary circumstances or rare encounters. It is a practice that can be cultivated in the minutiae of everyday life. I feel its presence in casual interactions, in fleeting moments of observation, and in the deliberate attention given to the experiences of others. I have learned that at each act of mindful engagement, no matter how small, contributes to the expansion of awareness, the deepening of understanding, and the strengthening of the invisible networks that connect all minds. This practice, when sustained and intentional, transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary, imbuing every moment with the potential for insight, resonance, and profound connection. I sense the convergence of perception as a dynamic, living system. The flow of consciousness is not isolated. It is a continuous interplay of energies, a network of feedback loops, resonances, and harmonics that shape experience, inform understanding, and generate insight. I have observed how each act of empathy amplifies this network, increasing its coherence, its complexity, and its capacity to generate transformative awareness. The universe, I perceive, is composed of these interactions, these convergences of consciousness that extend beyond the individual, reaching into the collective, and ultimately into the unknown dimensions of experience that lie beyond ordinary perception. I feel the expansion of awareness that emerges from inhabiting multiple perspectives. Each encounter illuminates hidden dimensions of experience, revealing patterns, structures, and harmonies that were previously imperceptible. I perceive the universality of human emotion, the resonance of shared experience, and the profound interconnectedness of consciousness itself. I recognize that this expansion is not abstract. It is tangible, measurable, and deeply transformative. I sense the liberation that arises from dissolving the barriers between self and other, the exhilaration that comes from inhabiting a reality beyond the familiar, and the profound insight that emerges when understanding is grounded in direct experience rather than conceptual abstraction. I have come to embrace the full magnitude of this practice. Empathy, when engaged as I have described, is both an instrument and a path, a methodology and a philosophy, a vehicle for transformation and a map of consciousness. I feel its impact in every fiber of my being, in the architecture of my thought, in the depth of my perception, and in the scope of my awareness. Each act of inhabiting another mind reshapes my own consciousness, alters my perception of reality, and contributes to the broader evolution of understanding. I have witnessed the profound potential inherent in this practice, and I am compelled to pursue it with unwavering intention, deliberate attention, and a fearless embrace of the unknown. I recognize the power of radical empathy to transform not only perception but identity. The self, when engaged in this practice, becomes a dynamic, permeable entity, capable of navigating the infinite complexity of human experience, while maintaining coherence, intentionality, and clarity. I feel the expansion of my own capacities, the refinement of awareness, and the deepening of insight as I inhabit the consciousness of others. I perceive the subtle interplay of influence, resonance, and transformation that occurs when minds converge, and I recognize that this is not a linear process but a dynamic fractal unfolding, an ongoing evolution that extends into the infinite possibilities of perception. I sense the culmination of this journey as both revelation and integration. Radical empathy is not a temporary state. It is a continuous practice, a living engagement with consciousness that reshapes understanding, expands awareness, and catalyzes transformation. I feel the convergence of insight, resonance, and presence as a unified force, a culmination of observation, engagement, and reflection. In inhabiting the minds of others, I have come to inhabit the broader architecture of consciousness itself, and in doing so, I perceive the profound truth that understanding, connection, and evolution are inseparable, interdependent, and infinite in their potential. I conclude, therefore, not with finality, but with the recognition that radical empathy is the path, the method, and the destination. I feel its power as a transformative force, its capacity to reshape perception, its ability to illuminate hidden dimensions of reality, and its essential role in the evolution of human consciousness. I recognize that the practice of inhabiting another mind is both a privilege and a responsibility, a journey into the depths of understanding, and a portal into the infinite landscapes of connection, insight, and awareness. In embracing this path, I step into the unknown with courage, curiosity, and reverence, and I witness the unfolding of consciousness as a living, dynamic, and infinitely expansive phenomenon, radiant with possibility, rich with insight, and profoundly transformative in every dimension of human experience.